Hey guys, welcome to a new video. Like, comment and subscribe if you enjoy. Without any further interruptions, enjoy the what if. Naruto was in the pavilion, with a tied-up Zoe secured to a barstool glaring at him. What is the meaning of this? She would shout, and Naruto would only look at her with a crazy grin. You don't know, so you must learn. Then, with a less than sane cackle, he would return to his cooking pot, giggling every now and then. Zoe was starting to seriously contemplate her safety with every little shiver that came over his shoulders at his smothered laughter. She tried escaping, but the more she tried, the tighter the bindings got. She tried cutting, burning, and breaking the rope, but it remained undamaged. She idly wondered what cursed materials were introduced during its creation, but resolved herself to the fate she would soon discover. He would not harm her under the pledge to her patron. She would survive this. After a few minutes, Naruto turned to her with a massive grin and stars in his eyes. In his hands was a bowl. Naruto set it down in front of her, and she was immediately hit with a strong smell of seasons and flavor. She didn't deny that it smelled good, but not to her particular liking. Naruto plopped down in front of her on the other side of the counter, and gave her a pair of chopsticks. She looked at him quizzically, and he only grinned. "Behold Zoe, the true food of the gods," Naruto said with a dramatic wave of his hands and snap of chopsticks. She didn't look convinced. Naruto hurried over and undid the bonds on her hands. She tried to get free, but Naruto immediately stopped her efforts. "Do not resist, you will appreciate my efforts after this, you will be awakened to the one true way," Naruto said strongly, his eyes no longer holding rationality. She looked past him and saw to her horror, the rest of the hunters. They were simply just watching. Some were even looking at the bot in curiosity to see if there was more to go around. "Help me," Zoe hissed, and Phoebe only shook her head sadly. "It's okay, you will understand, it's the true way." Zoe turned to Naruto, snarling in partial anger and panic. "Stop with the clones." Naruto smirked and prodded her forehead, which only increased her anger. "I am not eating that." Naruto looked like he had been physically stabbed, and even staggered back a few paces. Zoe sprung free from his weakened grasp and hissed at him. Naruto actually fell to the ground and started tracing circles with his finger. "But it's divine," he said childishly with a pout, continuing his circling. Zoe was agape at this display, before looking back at the bowl suspiciously and then back to the blonde. "Is it poisoned?" Naruto snapped to his feet, looking genuinely insulted, as if I would defile the food of the gods. Zoe honestly wasn't sure how to think about the male in front of her. He was strong, godly strong, and yet he never loomed over anyone, only carried them higher. Even in their battle, his clones never did any real harm to them. He never touched them perversely when he had the chance, and even respected them enough to not hold back unrealistically. She slumped a little, something she didn't do. She sighed, "Very well, I will try this concoction, but in exchange." Naruto appeared in front of her with stars in his eyes, grabbing her hand and shaking it. Thank you. You won't regret it. I surrendered the duel just so you could try it." She was shocked at that. He threw away a win for her to simply try this. She doubted it was hidden cowardice. "What is ramen?" She walked to the stool and sat down, before lifting the chopsticks and stabbing them into the broth. She picked up a few noodles and smelled them, looking for any source of toxins or poisons. Nope, only salty goodness. She sighed, and with a prodding look from Naruto, she put it in her mouth. Flavor. Allotted. It was like a whole feast of meaty flavors with salt and seasonings in a bite. She stabbed for more and drank the broth, appreciative of the dish. Naruto watched with a smile, but felt his mood darken slightly as he remembered the true food of the gods, Ayame and Tuchi's ramen. Kami, he wanted a bowl, or 30. Zoe finished her bowl in around 10 minutes, placing her chopsticks on the bowl and dabbing the corners of her mouth. "I must confess, this dish wasn't bad, but it still falls below ambrosia by a margin," she said, but when she looked at him, she was shocked to find him in his own little world. With a tear running down his cheek, "Naruto?" she called, and he snapped to his senses. He seemed to realize his situation and smiled at her brightly, a look ruined by his tear. He realized this a second later, and brushed it away with a sad smile. "Zoe, I have a confession to make. This is my attempt at the food of the gods. It isn't really it. The real stuff comes from my homeworld, made by a father and daughter duo, my favorite people in my entire life. I'm sorry to say that I will never be able to replicate their dishes, but I can say something with certainty. He regained his grin and pointed at himself victoriously. My ramen is 3 margins worse than theirs, and if it is only 1 margin behind ambrosia, then it is indeed supreme. He struck a victory pose, peace sign and all. Zoe only stared at him in befuddlement, before shaking her head and walking away. You're weird. Naruto wilted, but sighed and cleaned up his mess. Yeah. Zoe walked to the rest of the hunters, warmth in her stomach and her mind lost in thought. Ayame and Tucci, perhaps from, wait, he said. Home world, does that mean he isn't even supposed to exist here? Maybe that isn't why he is like the other males, because he truly isn't one of them. Lieutenant. Phoebe called, and Zoe flinched from her thoughts and looked up at them, determination in her eyes. Girls, we must win. Naruto walked back towards the clearing he left the girls in, noticing it was empty, and he sighed, before calling out. I know you are there. Can you come out so we can start the hunt? If not, I'm just going to wait, which is in my favor anyway, as you have to catch me, he said, before sitting down on a flat space and sighing. A few seconds later, Zoe and Phoebe appeared, rope in their hands. Well boy, ready to surrender? Naruto sighed, and here I thought we moved past that. It's Naruto, that's my name. I'm not boy, or male, or any other derogatory name. I have a name, use it. They looked at him curiously, before approaching him at fast speeds. Naruto rolled backwards and stood up, jumping back and landing with his back to a tree. We have an omission to make to the laurels, Zoe said, and Naruto frowned. What do you wish to add? Zoe smiled. Should we win, I will lead the quest to save my lady. Naruto blinked, and then looked confused. I thought that was what we were going to do anyway. Was there something I missed? Blink. What? Phoebe asked incredulously, her voice losing its harshness. You were going to let us lead. Naruto frowned. Why wouldn't I? I'm new to this world. I hardly know anything on the grand scheme of things, and any team I led would surely suffer. Zoe, from what I understand, is nearly 2,000 years old. She has infinite more experience than I do on this world, and you trust her. Why wouldn't she lead when she is clearly the best candidate? Zoe shook her head. You said it again. This world? What do you mean? Were you originally not? Naruto's expression darkened. Yes, I am not. I haven't been in this world for more than what you call a year. That was a shocker. Phoebe looked less than believing. Where do you come from then? Hell? Naruto's lips curled into a small, cruel smile. Yeah, something like that. That was chilling. The vocal, cheerful blonde of Sunshine wasn't there anymore. He was colder, darker, full of pain, anger, and loneliness. He literally had a dark aura around him, before it suddenly vanished, and he looked back up at them with his usual smile. Are you sure you want to waste time like this? You have until sunrise, and you're dawdling. Zoe really wasn't sure what to think at this point, so she went with her gut feeling. You're weird. Naruto twitched, and his head cocked to the side. Yeah, you said that earlier. Anyway, was there something else you wanted to add? Phoebe stepped forward. I want the answer to 3 questions, with complete answers and honesty. Naruto frowned. That is a dangerous statement. May I know what the questions are on? You. My abilities? No, that surprised Naruto, looking at her in confusion. What could you possibly want to know? You will find out at the end of the duel, Phoebe said, gripping the rope. Naruto held her gaze for a moment, before sighing. And if I win? I solemnly swear to never shoot you in the nuts. Naruto perked up at that. Tempting, I guess I will see when you ask your questions. Now come at me. The girls huffed at not getting an answer, and charged forward. A few sneaky hunters tried to get behind him, but let out startled cries as the tree Naruto was backed up against was actually several clones standing on each other's shoulders. Naruto grinned and then jumped at his clones, where they all scrambled with each other, hiding the original within their ranks. Eventually, they all formed into 5 rows of 5. Can you find the real one? They all chorused together, and the girls readied their arrows. I wouldn't do that. 3 of us are explosive, chimed a clone from the corner, and the hunters instantly hesitated. Greek fire? Asked a hunter. The clone looked confused. I don't know what that is, but if it blows up, sure. You can call it that. He laughed, and the other clones joined him in their chuckles. The hunters were really wigged out by that. They all started walking through the lines, inspecting each clones to see if they could identify the real one. Each Naruto grinned, and another spouted off. If you guess the wrong one, we scramble again, back to square one. Unless he explodes, at which point, it's game over anyways. They all laughed, before they all stopped suddenly. But seriously, don't blow up, it might kill. The hunter's eyes narrowed, before braving on undeterred. Naruto grinned at that, and waited for them to come to a conclusion. They examined each Naruto, before walking back and frowning. And then they all started running. The clones looked confused at that, but then noticed a weird green jar on the floor. It was really pretty. It glowed faintly, and was really hot. The clones were transfixed by this, and then an arrow came through the pierced the jar. Explosion time. The clones nearest instantly puffed out of existence. The ones farther away were thrown back from the force. The hunters charged back and started picking off suspicious clones, and eventually, they stopped, with 12 clones left. They looked at each of the clones, and one of them grew angry. "Oi! That could have killed someone." He was instantly shot, and he puffed into smoke. The hunters cursed, but Phoebe explained. "You survived Apollo's touch when in the morning, Greek fire would have barely harmed you." One of the clones grinned, and then he undid his jacket. On the inside, were these weird tags that pulsed and flames brightly. The hunters immediately backed away, their danger senses telling them to flee. The clone grinned. "Let me show you what an enemy of mine called art." He exploded in a ground-shaking boom, the light waking all the campers from their bunks and lighting up the skies. When the hunters returned, they saw a massive crater and a bleeding Naruto near the outskirts. The hunters immediately rushed forward, but when they got close, Naruto rolled out of the way and tumbled down the crater side, before coming to a skidding halt and standing up with blood dripping from his face and steam sealing his cuts. The hunters were bewildered by his regeneration, and Naruto cursed mentally. "What the hell was that? I wasn't even close. Since when were those tags that strong?" "It's that fact that there isn't a chakra in this world, kid. It naturally reacts much stronger than it would normally. It's a miracle I'm here, or you would have been critically injured." Naruto frowned at that. That wasn't expected. If all his seals were that much stronger, maybe that was any his summoning didn't work. He was probably summoning the whole freaking mountain with the chakra he was putting into it. That was a comforting thought. Maybe he really could see them again. And they could take him home. Naruto took in a few shaky breaths before a smile came to his face. He could feel it, hope, it was here with him. He crossed his fingers and beamed at the night sky. "Taiju Kage Bunshin no Jutsu," he bellowed, and the entire crater and surrounding forests were covered in smoke. The hunters' jaws dropped as the smoke cleared, revealing an army. A clone army. Thousands of Naruto clones were crammed together, looking at Naruto with hope before he muttered to them. "Go. See if it's true. Don't you dare dispel until you can confirm it. Go, and please be right." They all nodded, before sprinting off at terrifying speeds. Naruto watched them go with a small smile of hope, something all the hunters missed except one. "What happened?" Zoe called, and Naruto grinned at her. "Hope." She stared at him for a moment, before charging him, the rest of the hunters coming after him. Naruto grinned at all of them, his old self burning at him. He could see them, he could hear them. Tsunade Bachin, Gaara, B, Kakashi-sensei, the Toads, Kono and his little crew, the Hidden Leaf Village. He could hear them. He roared at the sky and charged the hunters, who noticed his change and feel his hope, his desperate hope. They clashed. The sun rose, and the second curfew was up. The campers came running out, inspecting the field. They knew the game between Naruto and the hunters was happening, but the harpies came to eat them, and so they had to leave, but everyone was curious on what caused the big bang last night. The camp rushed forward, and was in awe and horror at what they saw. The forest, it was smaller. And a really big hole was the reason. In the center, it looked like a lake used to be there, but now it was completely dried up. Near the bottom ring, a weird wall was up, with a strange power coursing through it, and at the bottom was Naruto. He was out like a light, with several of the hunters surrounding him, either knocked out or sleeping peacefully. Some were beginning to wake up, and all the campers retreated in fear. They would wait till the storm was over before looking at the damage. Zoe was the first to wake up. She was sleeping fairly well, but when she felt the ground beneath her she tensed. This was Earth, not her sleeping bag. She sat up quickly, examining her surrounding and checking for weapons. She glanced at her sisters, and saw they were all sleeping on the ground, surrounding a snoring Naruto, who had a rope tied securely around his foot. She blinked as her memories came back and she smiled. They had won, though not really. They had eventually captured a clone, and tied him up. When Naruto appeared, they told him they had won as they had captured him, as the clones were technically him. He fought with them, and when they were arguing, he tripped an old trap that was there long before they arrived that night. The hunters were quick to grab him and say they won. He looked incredulous, and eventually they all laughed, which was weird. He was a male, that didn't happen. Eventually, one by one, her sisters had started to pass out. Naruto had tried to carry them. Phoebe protested vehemently, and so, they camped in the center of the crater, thought if she remembered right, Naruto was outside of it. Zoe heard a small choking sound, and she looked over to see Naruto with his eyebrows drawn together and cold sweat in his face. His right hand twitching, a blue energy appearing and disappearing in his palm, responding to his dream self calling to it. She frowned and tried to wake him, but she was soon flying backwards as a foot stretched out and planted itself on her chest with great force, grinding her skin as she slid against the inclining slope. A blue spiraling sphere in his right hand outstretched, his eyes clouded, and then the fog vanished, before dispelling his attack and rushing over to Zoe, who had blood leaking out of her mouth. Damn it! Don't do that! Naruto chastised her in anger and worry as he bit his thumb and drew a circle on her stomach with his blood, before going through some hand signs and placing his hands in a triangle shape over the circle so it was in the open space between his hands. Zoe rasped and coughed a few more times, before her breathing cleared and Naruto's blood smoked and vanished, though a faded red circle was on her stomach like a scar. Zoe glared at him, before letting her head fall, which Naruto caught with a look of dismay and she muttered something out. I'm sorry, I am sorry, she shouted at him, before turning her head away. I shouldn't have done that. Naruto grinned, apologized or tried to wake me up. She glared at me before coughing and flicked him the throat. Let go, before the hunters kill you for touching me. What are you doing? Naruto flinched and immediately propped Zoe up, before cowering behind her. Phoebe and a few other hunters were up, noticing the noise, and more were on the way. An accident, don't worry, I'm fine, Zoe said with placating hands, though she didn't know why the hell she was defending him. There is blood on your mouth. Naruto hastily brought a hand around with a warm white towel that he got from who knows where, and quickly dabbed her mouth clean, before shrinking back. What blood? Zoe asked innocently, and Phoebe was speechless. Zoe felt Naruto's healing hands on her back, and pushed herself onto her feet, feeling good as new. Do not delay, we have a battle with Camp Half-Blood soon, so gear up and prepare, Zoe ordered, before walking off, Naruto being left in the line of fire. He smiled nervously, before slamming both palms on the ground and the weird wall around them lost its power, and then crumbled. He was sent a few questioning looks and Naruto only grumbled. To protect you from the monsters in this forest while we slept, geez, what did you think I was doing? Keeping you prisoner, he thought angrily, before jumping high in the air and running off. I hope he isn't participating in the games, a hunter said quietly. She was answered with solemn nods. Phoebe on the other hand watched him go, before turning to them to get ready. I have my questions, boy, and you will answer them. Naruto ran over the treetops, taking note of the campers in awe of the destruction he had caused. A few years ago, he would have been thrilled at the attention, but now, yikes. I'm going to have to fill that hole, huh? Well, a talk to Chiron is needed. Maybe I can ask him to let me fill it with water, much easier than earth. Naruto ran to the big house, before jumping down towards the earth and landing in a crouch, walking in without pause as his ears detected the desired presence. Chiron and Lord Grapesqueezer were on the patio playing another game of Pinnacle. He had been allowed to play before, but was kicked out because they ran out of stuff to give him for prizes. That was a funny day to see Grape sink in depression when he handed over his Diet Coke. Naruto walked in with a grin and sat down at the table, looking at Chiron with a knowing glance. How much trouble am I in? Chiron sighed. You're not a demigod of this camp, so you are outside my jurisdiction. Mr. D has full authority. Naruto turned to Mr. D, who looked like he would rather be there than anywhere else. So, can I just make it a lake? It would be a pain to fill it back up with earth, but not impossible. It's your call, it's your forest after all. Mr. D was looking everywhere but Naruto. Do what you wish. It needs to be repaired by the time the capture the flag game commences. Naruto nodded with a sigh and got up, before turning to Kirin. I'll make it partially a lake, a middle ground. I know the nature spirits would enjoy a place to hide from those pervy satyrs. Kirin snorted and Mr. D flinched, remembering what landed him with his punishment in the first place. Naruto walked off, settling for a walk instead of a run as he talked with his, mind mates? They were kind of like his roommates, but in his mind. Ha ha, very funny Gaki. Son Goku snorted. Naruto grinned and laughed lightly. He and his Biju tenants talked for a while on the best plans, before finally deciding to talk to the nature spirits for their approval before doing anything. What a lucky decision. Because when he entered the common ground for him and the spirits, he saw a satyr running around trying to catch a dryad, who was less than happy about his advances. Naruto growled and the spirit heard him, and with a look of hope she ran behind him. The satyr didn't notice in time. Poor bastard. He collided into Naruto head first like he was a tree, which was a common trick to dislodge a dryad. He looked gleefully upward, probably hoping to see the dryad fall out into his waiting arms. What he was met with was the cold, hard, deadly stare of the current Lord of the Wild, the champion of Pan. His furrowed brow seemed to cast a menacing shadow, his awakening silver eyes glinting like oiled steel under the moon as they held a silent, powerful promise. Pain. The satyr shrieked in terror and tried to flee, but Naruto grabbed one of his horns and harshly slammed him into the ground head first, bringing a pained bleat to his ears. Naruto lifted his prisoner into the air and glared at him. I believe I made myself clear on the proper methods of visiting, communicating, and interacting with the other nature spirits. This was definitely the top 5 of what I said was not to be done. At what point did you misunderstand? Perhaps I should clarify once again, and I know who would be the perfect people to help get the message across. And they just so happen to be visiting today. The satyr's eyes widened in fear and slight excitement, creepy. Naruto's glare hardened, and then turned to the spirit behind him, who was blushing up a storm. Her green cheeks a potent shade of red as she clung to his back. Did he do anything to you? Are you okay? He asked caringly, his aggressive aura gone and replaced with a soft and warm aura. The dryad buried his face into his back, shaking her head. No, I'm okay. She muttered, and then shivered when Naruto's hand came around and grabbed her shoulder, before pulling her to his side and he smiled down at her with a large smile. Oh good. I was thinking I might have had to kill him, would have been a shame. The satyrs whimpered and then got down on all fours, apologizing to the dryad profusely. She accepted it with a blush and smile, and the satyr fled at high speeds. Naruto watched him go, before looking back down at the dryad. Hey, do you mind if you gather your sisters? I'm about to repair the big crater I left in the playing fields, and I wanted to know if any of you had a preference. Her eyes widened before she nodded happily and walked into a tree, before a green pulse echoed through the forest. Naruto watched as spirits answered the call, and he walked to a nearby stream so he could meet with everyone. Can't leave out some of them, can he? Naruto watched with a smile as the spirits in the forest convened around him, each with their joyful smiles and fluttering dresses, flowers in their hair or dewdrop jewelry made of water. Naruto couldn't help but smile at all of them, something they reflected back with a tad more red to their color. Hey everyone, sorry for calling you on such short notice, but I had a few things I needed to discuss with you. Sorry if you were in the middle of something, I will try to keep it brief. They all nodded, while some were stuttering and telling him it was not big deal, he could call them anytime. Naruto nodded his thanks, making a naiad shrink behind her siblings with an even larger red tinge. I am responsible for the crater in the forest. I wanted to apologize to you all. I miscalculated the power of my technique, and caused much more harm than intended. Naruto stated, giving a small bow in apology. They were quick to forgive him and he smiled, thanks, anyway, I'm going to repair it. I wanted to know, since it's in a sense a blank canvas of land, what did you want it to be? A lake? A flat plain? A garden? Waterfall? It's your forest. Mr. D told me to do as I wish, only as long as I finish it before the game today. So, what will it be? Any preference? The spirits looked overjoyed by his question, and brought about some changes and inputs, some landscaping ideas, and a few general landmarks. A few of the water spirits actually used the river surface as a template, controlling the water in such a way it was almost like an interactive 3D blueprint. Naruto grinned at the info, before nodding and thanking them all. Thanks guys. I'll be sure to do that, but I will need you guys to supervise so I don't get it wrong. Don't be shy to point it out, okay? This is the Earth, it doesn't like to change. They nodded with smiles and then Naruto turned serious. Before I called this meeting, I stumbled upon a satyr chasing after a spirit. They gasped in shock at that, and frowned, and the dryads comforted the spirit in question. Naruto sighed. I got there before there was any damage done, however this shows me that my word is being questioned, and maybe even ignored. I ask you, has this happened before? Has anyone else broken my word? He stared out over them all, and was angered as he saw several hands go up. A lot. Naruto clenched his fists in anger. Were you successful in getting away? Luckily, he got nods and smiles, and he sighed in relief. Well, that is good, but then his expression grew angered and darkened, but it appears I will need to re-educate them, maybe with some help this time. He knew that it was a rare thing for a dryad to be caught. They were terribly fast on the run, and even faster when fleeing. The attempt itself was the issue. He looked at the spirits and noticed they were all watching him with lazy and embarrassed smiles, and Naruto looked confused before shaking himself. They're just happy about my stance, that's all. Naruto nodded to all of them with a smile and waved them after him. All right, I'm going to get started, wanna watch? He was about to walk away, but a naiad stopped him and pointed to a tree. They have been watching us this whole time. Do you know who they are? Naruto immediately blurred from existence, before a cry of dismay was heard in a small crash. Naruto landed back on the forest floor, his opponent landing in a heap on the grass. Can I help you, Phoebe? Naruto asked in part shock and surprise. How did we not sense her? What, we did, were you not paying attention? Don't look for chakra signatures, we've been over this. Kukua reprimanded immediately, and Naruto cringed internally at the reminder. Phoebe stood up, brushing herself off. I have questions, and you promised me answers. Naruto frowned at her, before nodding. Yes, I did, and I didn't forget if that was what you were wondering, at all. I have to fix the crater from last night, we caused quite the explosion, and I need to fix that before the game between you and the campers. So, hope you don't mind waiting a bit. Now, she said with a frown, and Naruto frowned in turn, the spirits behind him giving their own glares at Phoebe. She ignored them and focused on Naruto, who looked to be thinking. If you insist, come on. Naruto started walking away, and Phoebe ran in front of him at high speeds, her bow drawn in his face. Naruto continued walking, undeterred by her arrow. It was blunted, and it couldn't break his skin. If she aimed it right, she might break his nose, but he was fast enough to catch any throat or body shots. Are your questions about me so important that I have to break my word just to hear them? Naruto asked with confusion. I gave my word, and if there is one thing about me that will always fall back on, it's that I keep my word, to death. Phoebe stared at him harshly, annoyed that he did not fear her. Men should know their place. She shot her arrow at high speeds, and Naruto caught it with a blur of his hand, before looking at her in anger. Hey, what's your problem? Naruto said angrily, before tossing the arrow back to her. I'm on a deadline. I promised I would answer your questions. However, I didn't say I would answer them first thing. You passed out, so you missed your spot on the queue last night. You have to wait your turn. The spirits come first now, he said with iron in his tone, before finally walking past her, his negative emotion sensing going through the roof as he did so. She is angry, but also confused. Be wary of her, kid, she hasn't come up with her own answers yet. Naruto thanked Kurama and kept walking, though he activated Sage Mode as he moved on, the spirits immediately moving closer when he did so. He smiled at them, but he was using it to enhance his senses. If the other hunters were confused, he might need to fight for his life, or his man bits, whichever they targeted first. Naruto sat at the edge of the crater. He gazed at it with annoyance and a tinge of sadness. He closed his eyes and clapped his hands together, before slapping his palms on his knees and took a deep breath in. His entire body posture relaxed and his hands fell slack as his knuckles fell to the ground. He was in his own world at this point, and wasn't aware that he had an audience other than the nature spirits. The hunters of Artemis were thinking of looking for more traps, when they saw Naruto and a group of nature spirits walk into the clearing. They were shocked with what they were watching happen right now. Naruto's outline glowed green powerfully, green energy vaporizing and rising from him like a noxious cloud, but everything it touched healed. The ground in the crater started to break apart and rise, while some stayed low and even went further. The landscape tossed itself around while Naruto hummed lowly in concentration. Water started to compress itself out of thin air and filled several small pools, and a waterfall sustained itself on the tumultuous terrain. Once the ground was brought to the correct shape, grass from under Naruto and the edge of the circle began to creep in. Tree roots started to shoot out, and as they traveled underground, small saplings stood in their place when they breached the surface. A cave opening stopped some of the growth, but it was soon hidden behind a thick curtain of vines. Trees started to appear, but instead of pines and firs, willow trees grew to impressive heights, their listless branches and leaves free to flutter as they please. The entire change took about an hour, but as it happened, everyone assumed it took much less time. Being transfixed by this display of power really screwed their senses over. Naruto's aura of power faded, and the unnatural glow he gave the outside world faded. Naruto fell back, breathing heavily with sweat pouring off his brow. The power of the wild, wow, hurts like a bitch. The spirits and hunters frowned at his language. Congratulations. The hunters are victorious. For the 56th time in a row. He finished in a normal voice, obviously saddened that the outcome hadn't changed, but not surprised. Perseus Jackson, Talia roared and confronted him. Their argument was quick, and fairly hostile on Talia's side. Naruto sat on a high branch in the trees, watching the scene unfold with an unreadable expression, except for his closed fists. Zoe was being congratulated by her sisters, and Phoebe was glaring up at the blonde in the trees. Naruto watched the two of them tousle, before Percy was thrown backwards, before colliding into a tree and stopping. A sizzling was heard and smoke came from his clothing. They had a brief spat, before Naruto felt a presence approaching. He decided enough was enough. Percy and Talia launched their attacks at each other, compressed water shot versus a lightning bolt. Naruto appeared right in between the two attacks, and held his hands apart to intercept them as they collided. The elements collided with him. He winced at the lightning, nagging himself to start building a resistance, but kept it under wraps. The water hit his hand and splashed up against it like a stone wall, before spraying backwards. The lightning wrapped around his hand like a snake in its coils, before it dissipated in a small light show of badassery. Talia and Percy were speechless at his sudden arrival, and Naruto glared at the both of them, before turning and looking into the forest. Everyone turned to look where he was looking, and their faces dropped in shock and horror. The old mummy that was the oracle was walking towards them, green smoke waving around her at forms of snakes as she moved. It stopped in front of the hunters, earning shocked looks from the campers, and opened her mummified mouth and spoke in a raspy tone. "Approach, speaker, and ask." Naruto was shivering as he heard the voice. It reminded him of Orochimaru, but less evil. Just the way it grated in his ears, it made him shake. Zoe swallowed hard, before stepping forward and staring at the oracle. "What must I do to help my goddess?" The oracle started shooting green smoke everywhere, and her disembodied voice started to carry itself all over the forest. 5 shall go to the goddess in chains, accompanying the conqueror of pain. Champion of the wild shall stand at the dawn of day. But the giant of bronze will stand in his way. The bane of Olympus shall show the trail. Maidens and campers combined will prevail. The titan's curse must one withstand. But against all, the sage will lend a helping hand. The oracle snapped her jaw shut, and then turned to walk, and stood in front of the grim face of Naruto. "What is—" Naruto began to say, but he was cut off by the disembodied voice returning. "Carrier of the 9, death only awaits. The land of fire, saved by your fate. A single choice will be your own, to doom this world or return home. You will aid the half-blood of the eldest gods. To change this world and create a new law. The home of the gods will be saved, but will fall. And only you can bear the weight of all." The oracle staggered back, before sitting down on a lone rock, and returning to her hardened disposition. Chiron and Dionysus were bug-eyed at the prophecy, and Naruto stood stock still, his heart starting to crack. A single choice your own, to doom this world or return home. Naruto felt his knees buckle as he fell to the earth, his hands catching him from falling face first. He gripped the earthen carpet beneath him, tears threatening to spill from his eyes. Naruto, Seiken started, but stopped. What could she say? Naruto coughed roughly, before returning to his feet and plastering on his trademark smile. All right. Well, looks like I'm tagging along to return your goddess Zoe. Who's coming with? She stared at him in awe of how he could just shove the pain behind him. The oracle literally just told him he was going to die. Death only awaits. What a cruel fate to hear. Naruto stared at her, noticing she wasn't going to answer. He sighed and turned around, his white sage cloak swaying behind him with his steps. All right. Well, I'll come by the big house at lunch. We can decide then, Naruto said. He looked like he wanted to say something more, but held his tongue and turned, before disappearing into the trees. Nature spirits appeared around him as he walked, following him as they tried to console him, but he only smiled and told them nothing was wrong. Which was a load of BS. The spirits only watched him go farther as he entered monster territory, a sadness descending over the audience of campers and hunters alike. Naruto sighed as he lay with his back to the earth, staring up at the clouds like the memory of a certain Nara he was fond of. He couldn't wrap his head around it. Hey, you remember that guy the first gave my title to for the worst luck? Yes, the smoocher in the lake. I reclaim my title. This is crap. The Biju laughed dryly at the statement, which wasn't wrong in the slightest. The nicest people really did have the worst luck, huh? He was hated by his village since he could remember. He crushes on a girl who fell for his teammate. His teammate then betrays everyone, almost killing him, and the girl he loves blames him for it. He fights as hard as he could to get him back, suffering losses and tragedies along the way. After saving the whole fucking world, his friend betrays him again. After a crazy battle, which they are both left with a missing limb, he returns the hero he always wanted to be. To be loved and respected by everyone, and then he gets yanked into this world. Back to square one, with only his name, lifelong companions, and enough power to destroy everything in sight, and then told he was going to die. His only hope at returning home was to doom this world to whatever it was doomed for. Naruto snorted as he reflected on his life. He felt like hanging himself with his own cloak. Naruto, it will be fine. I can safely say that with our aid, only death itself will offer a challenge. Naruto smiled, but felt it slide slightly as he closed his eyes. Yeah, too bad. That is exactly what's waiting for me. The Biju frowned. Kid, this isn't anything different from our home. Naruto sighed. No, it is different. Food is cheaper. Kurama snarled. Don't get snippy. This is exactly like Konoha. Everyone shamed you, condemned you. Nobody believed, or wanted you to survive. But you did. You lived. You're alive. Fight for it, damn it. Show the people of this world that fate has nothing on you. Naruto stared vacantly at the sky above, mulling over the words Kurama had spoken. A familiar smile started to tug at his lips as he sat up. Well, I have to aid the hunters. We'll start there. Isobu sighed. Progress. Naruto snorted, before standing up and brushing off the non-existent grass and dirt of his pants. He started walking for the big house, wondering just how the oracle knew he carried the 9 inside him. Prophecies are freaky, but then again. He was the child of prophecy. Thanks for that, grumpy old drunken toad. Naruto walked into the big house recreational room, staring at the assembled figures. All the cabin head counselors were sitting in their chairs, arguing over a pool table. Zoe stood standing with a few hunters behind her. They saw me come in, and all conversation died immediately. All eyes on me. Naruto walked in and snorted, and look at that, you're all quiet. I didn't have to tell you to stop talking. We're learning, he said with happiness, though even to him it sounded a little fake. Naruto walked to the pool table, before jumping into the center and sitting on it, staring at all the campers. Okay. This is how this is going to go. I have been chosen by the Oracle of whatever to accompany the hunters on their quest to save their goddess. Which means, that I am outside the 5 mentioned in the prophecy. Now, combined you will prevail, which means that at one point or another, I can't fight for you. You will have to win on your own. Knowing that, you will need to balance yourselves out. I recommended 3 hunters and 2 campers. Naruto turned to look at everyone behind him, knowing that the hunters are leading the quest. I recommend female members to increase teamwork. I won't go asking if you're a virgin or not, so don't be afraid to step up. All around the campers blushed, but the hunters only stared at Naruto, a few even held pity. Naruto sighed, because I can't fight in the battles that count. I recommend a powerhouse, someone who can fight like hell and win, even at the cost of their own life. We need someone who will not flee, and will face the battle, even if it's completely hopeless, and fight anyway. Chiron, do you have someone who matches my description? Chiron frowned. You're asking for a selfless hero, you realize that, right? They may be battle-hardened, but they're kids, nobody has faced something like that. Naruto snorted. Oh, I guess it's just me then, he muttered, before looking at Talia, who flinched at his eyes, they were so serious. Talia, you're a child of the big three, right? Zeus? She nodded. Naruto nodded. Okay, that's one. Who else? Grover. Percy said, he may not be a half-blood, but he is a camper, and he has several tracking spells and abilities that could prove useful should some covered Artemis's tracks. They abducted a goddess, we need a surefire way to locate her. Naruto nodded in agreement, and smiled. And who said you were a complete idiot? Your girlfriend must be nailing some brains in there pretty good. Annabeth and Percy turned crimson and started yelling, vehemently arguing against this claim, and Naruto only laughed. It wasn't long until they started yelling at each other. The campers and Chiron had a good laugh at their red embarrassed expressions. Even Mr. D smiled faintly at the argument. Naruto caught it and smirked knowingly, and the god only hid behind his wine magazine. Percy was glowing red, before he shook himself with a thought. Percy stood up. Wait, I want to go too. Naruto turned to him, and studied him. The hunters seemed to panic at this, and Zoe announced her distress. No, I refuse, traveling with a male is out of the question. But you traveled here with me. That was under direct orders in an emergency for a short distance. We barely tolerated it as it was. But Naruto is a boy. A clone of Naruto suddenly popped into existence, appearing right in front of Percy. Clad in only wispy smoke and blonde pigtails, she smirked sultrily at the son of Poseidon, who was gaping like a fish. Are you sure? Percy's nose exploded like a geyser along with all the other males present. Chiron staggered, but held himself together. Mr. D didn't appear to notice, but if you looked closely, you could see a small river of crimson dripping under his magazine. All the girls were staring in shock at the nude seductress, before Naruto quickly grabbed a pool pole and whacked her, dispelling her, and he sat back, sighing. Well, now that we have all the boys out of the way, I'd say that we are ready to depart. Naruto said calmly, while the hunters looked like they wanted to kill him. Wah, what was that? Clarice said with shock, a small red river under her nose. Naruto looked at her with surprise, and then a smirk. That was actually my first ninja technique of my own creation. My home world was filled with perverts of all shapes and sizes. Even children were corrupted at an early age. The only reason I remained untouched was because people would rather torture me than share. I created the technique to stun and incapacitate the perverts, or used it as a distraction to make an escape. It is a tad embarrassing, but its results are all around you, he said with a wave of his hand, gesturing to the floor where all the boys lay, except the Apollo cabin leader. Noted. The girls looked appeased slightly, but were rather put off by the torture comment. Naruto looked to Zoe. Well, do you have your hunters picked? She nodded, and two girls stepped forward, Phoebe and Bianca? Are you sure? She is the newest member of your crew? Zoe frowned. Yes, but she is skilled, and if her godly parent is who I believe, her help will be invaluable. Naruto stared at her for a moment, and Zoe found herself unsettled by the complete lack of emotion in his eyes. He was so focused, his mind running those scenarios at high speeds, calculating if they missed anything. Naruto eventually dropped her gaze, and turned to Chiron. Then I believe we are all set. He looked to Zoe. I'm assuming you want to leave when the moon is out? Easier to track her, am I right? She looked surprised, but nodded. Yes, tonight we head out. After dinner, meet here for finalizing our plan. The conscious campers dispersed, while Chiron and Will went about waking up their sleeping campmates. Naruto followed the hunters, and after a while, they turned to him with a look of irritation. Are you following us to discuss the quest? It isn't necessary. Just do as you're told and we will be fine. Naruto snorted. While I would like to retort with some snappy comment on my combat experience, it's not why I am here. Phoebe, it's your turn. Zoe looked confused. When Phoebe stepped forward, She was about to start when Naruto stopped her with a raised hand. I will answer your questions, but I will answer you, not anyone else. The information I share, depending on what it is, will be extremely dangerous. I must ask that when I give you the information, anyone outside the hunt will never have it. You must swear to an oath of secrecy, are we clear? Phoebe looked smug, and why should I? You will answer my questions regardless. Naruto frowned, because if you don't, I will have to kill you. The hunters immediately tensed, and closed ranks, hands on their weapons. What? Naruto grimaced, again, that all depends on the questions you ask, but if you can't keep quiet, you will have to die. I'm sorry, but it has to be that way for now. They looked at him with a mixture of anger and worry. If he wanted to kill them, he probably could. Phoebe looked at him hatefully, but nodded, very well, I swear. That isn't necessary yet. Naruto interrupted with a wince, only if the question's needed. If they don't, then there is no need. Please, ask away. Phoebe looked even more angered, before taking a deep breath. Have you ever done any harm or thought of doing harm to any woman with selfish intentions in mind? Naruto looked genuinely insulted at the question. No, I have never allowed my personal wants and desires to affect myself so greatly that I would harm another. They looked at him strangely, before Phoebe gripped her fists together. Swear it. I swear. Swear it on the river Styx. Naruto looked confused, but nodded. I swear on the river Styx. Thunder rumbled in the sky, and the girls watched with a confident look in their eyes, which only widened in shock as Naruto still stood there, waiting for their next question. Phoebe's eyes were the size of dinner plates as she stared at him in disbelief. Never. Naruto looked even more angered by that. Yes, last question. Phoebe looked at him in shock. I still have two. Naruto snorted. No, you have one. Speak. Phoebe glared at him, but she was the only one. The rest of the hunters were looking at him in awe and respect. No, no way. Can we count on you? Phoebe asked quietly, her voice. All the hunters stared at her in shock, but looked to Naruto, blank expressions. Naruto looked at them, and then a grin connected his cheeks. For as long as I am under contract from Artemis, I will do my absolute best to keep you healthy and safe. I will not abandon you. I will stick by, until one of you shoots me, at which point I might be farther away, but I'll be close by, he said with eyes glittering with humor. The hunters looked, not happy, but relieved almost that they couldn't really count on his aid. Phoebe was staring hard into his eyes, and he sighed, before raising his hands. I swear of the river Styx. Thunder rumbled in assent, and Phoebe's shoulders slacked with relief, before eyeing him with a smirk and a bit of humor. You know, you might not be all that bad, for a boy. Naruto rolled his eyes and walked off. Name is Naruto girl, get it right. They parted ways, but unknown to the other, all of them had a faint smile on their faces. What do you mean Phoebe isn't coming? Zoe sighed, glaring at Talia. Those boys of Hermes put centaur blood in her shirt. Her skin is healed and she is healthy thanks to Naruto. But the stress on her mind and shot immune system isn't mission ready anymore. We will have to leave without her. What? But we need 5, we did, but now we have 4, we can't waste time to pick a new member. Zoe said with a quickly growing angered tone. Naruto sighed as he watched the two bicker, before turning to Bianca, who looked to be gripping her silvery clothes in her nerves. Hey, do you what their problem is? She shook her head, but Grover spoke up, it's complicated, it happened a while back, almost a few years now actually. Talia was thinking of joining, same as Annabeth, but something happened. I wasn't there for that, but they have been against each other ever since. Naruto sighed, before looking back at the two, his eyebrow twitching in anger. He watched them for a few minutes longer, growing increasingly annoyed. Eventually, their argument descended into baseless name-calling, and he finally snapped. I can see why the Oracle asked me to go with you. If I left you alone this mission would never succeed, he said loudly, drawing the angered female's attention. What did you say? Talia roared, electricity crackling through her spear. Naruto snorted, look at you two, arguing like little sisters. Here is the bottom line. Phoebe isn't coming, we aren't going to pick another member, and we are wasting time standing here listening to you insult contest. If you're gonna continue, I'm going to knock you out and throw you in the trunk, with gags and rope. Don't test me. Naruto then turned and headed towards the van, ignoring their yells at him to stop, and got in the passenger seat. Zoe quickly got in the driver's seat, which ended up in another pointless argument, and Naruto blew up. He released some ki that made everyone in the car pale, and he spoke in a demonic voice that Zoe remembered and didn't like. Drive. She complied and geared up to go, before rolling forward and picking up speed. Grover tried to make light conversation, but in the end, it settled into silence as Naruto stared out the window emptily, depressed to be outside of nature's comforting field. He really hated the city. It was disgusting seeing all these metal towers and feeling all the toxins and garbage in the air. Naruto stood in front of the National Air and Space Museum, staring at the darkened rooms and well-groomed lawns. He felt a pang of annoyance for the bushes, which were whacked and chopped into ghastly shapes of conformity. What part of that was artistic? Naruto, what are you standing there for? Come on. Grover says it's this way. Naruto looked to see Taliah waving at him, and he gave a hesitant nod, before following. After they entered they started looking around, though Naruto just summoned some clones and had one go with each person. He sat at the receptionist desk, looking at all the cameras and then closed his eyes, extending his senses for energy. Monster he found out earlier had a unique energy, or aura. It was predatory, but also violent like an assassin. It was like looking for a rock buried under mud in the middle of a river, but with his 9 buddies, it was easy. The building next door, there is a strong presence there, but it isn't a monster, it's colder, stronger. Naruto nodded, before creating a clone and dispelling it, sharing his knowledge with the clones on guard duty. He then rose from the desk and walked out, before turning and heading for the building. And then he heard a loud shout. Naruto looked at the doors and saw men slam it closed, before he heard footsteps running at him. Naruto twitched, but as he was about to attack, the figure appeared. It was Percy. Naruto, take me to the others, we got a major problem and it's coming fast. Naruto just grabbed him and then turned and threw him behind him, just in time for a large lion gleaming with a metallic luster landed in front of Naruto, and 12 skeleton warriors started to hobble towards him. Part of Jackson's missing sleeve was in their hands, and some of them were smelling it. Naruto would have sighed, but he was focused on the lion in front of him. If the skeletons were tracking Percy, then he wouldn't get in the way. They were slow, and would likely avoid him if he avoided them. So he let them pass, but kept his eyes on the lion. Once the skeletons passed him, clones popped into existence, and grabbed a skeleton, before hurling them back towards the building they came from, crashing into the wall and ground, and one hit a car, which would be pricey. Naruto never took his eyes off the lion, and just when he was about to make a move, Grover shouted out. Naruto! Watch out! The lion immediately lost focus in Naruto and charged after Grover, who yelped and ran into the building. Naruto cursed and followed after him. Grover, you idiot! Naruto shouted as he grabbed the lion's tail, and with a hard yank, he stopped the beast's charge. He went up to the lion and delivered an earth-shattering punch to its head, sending the creature flying backwards. What the hell do you mean, watch out? What did you think I was doing? It was standing right in front of me. How could I have missed it? He roared, before the lion roared in kind and charged him. He caught the beast's mouth and held his ground, before a clawed paw swiped at him. He jumped over the creature's head, flipping and dropping with a downwards kick. The ground cracked as the creature sank into the floor from the strike. Naruto looked at the damage for a moment, before smiling. I bet Ba-chan would be happy to see me use her move. He walked closer to the beast, who suddenly opened its eyes and lunged at him, head-butting him savagely and sending him careening into a display, knocking it over on top of him. The lion started climbing, jumping from exhibit to exhibit as it chased after the hunters and Percy. Taliah was running to the receptionist desk for something, and Grover was frantically playing his pipes, trying to confuse the beast. Naruto dug himself out of the rubble, rubbing his forearms. Damn, I actually felt that. Do not allow this to make a mockery of us. I refuse to accept being defeated by a mangy cat. Naruto snorted, before shooting up, running on top the air and then drawing level with the beast again. It swiped at him, but he caught the paw and pulled. He landed on the creature's back and it fell to the ground floor, riding and slamming into things to try and get Naruto off. Zoe. The mouth. Shoot it. Zoe and Bianca ran forwards with practiced grace, leaping from insane places to opposite vantage points, before raining down silver arrows that stabbed into the maw of the beast as it roared. The lion screamed in outrage, and then Percy appeared on the bottom floor, a food snack in his hand. He charged and threw it into the beast's throat. Naruto felt like yelling at the kid, but then the beast started to choke. It writhed and struggled, until it landed on all fours and coughed. Spitting the food out, Percy stared at it for a few seconds, before running back to cover with the lion on his heels. The hunters tried to regain its attention with arrows, but it just bounced off its skin. He roared in outrage, and then Naruto had an idea. Naruto leapt off the creature's back, before landing in front, commanding all its attention. He pulled out a small ball of what looked like paper, and then entered a grappling stance. The hunters and campers screamed at him to get out of the way, but Naruto held firm. The lion roared and tried to bite him, and Naruto let him. Naruto grimaced in pain as it bit into his flesh. His spectators screamed and Percy ran in to try and deter the creature. But Naruto smirked suddenly. The beast's eyes stared to widen as if struggled to swallow, and when it did, it let go of Naruto, smoke pouring out of its maw as it coughed. Naruto sank to the floor with a grin and a bleeding arm, and then muttered out one word. Boom. A large explosion was heard, and the lion puffed out like a water balloon, blood flying out of its mouth, as fire exploded out of it, along with a lot of smoke and heat. The lion keeled over and fell, dead. Naruto smirked at the creature, before looking at his arm. He tried to move his fingers, and when they didn't move, he glared in annoyance. Severed the tendons, bastard, those are some seriously sharp teeth. Percy and the other ran to him, ignoring the smoking corpse that was in the middle of the room, and addressed his wound. Naruto smiled at them, ignoring the growing pool on the floor. Don't worry, I'm fine. I survived a lot worse than this. If anything, it's another cool story. Think that maybe the scars will pass off as a shark bite? Now that could be cool. Zoe looked at him like was an idiot, and Bianca was trying to get his wound to close with some bandages. Percy was struggling to open his canteen of water and Grover was looking worried from a distance, but he was busy charming the guards, so he could come over. Percy eventually gave up on the canteen and stretched his hand to a water fountain, before water burst out of it and flooded towards Naruto, snaking over his skin gently and healing his abrasions. Naruto watched the process with fascination. It was truly an interesting process. When Percy got to the major wound on his arm, Naruto stopped him. Don't worry about that one, it's already healing, save your strength. The group looked confused, before a strange red energy started hissing on his skin. It bubbled like acid as it covered the room, and then the smell of burning flesh hit the air as Naruto grit his teeth slightly as the wound regrew tissue, healed the bone, replaced the blood, and regrew skin in a matter of seconds. Naruto stretched his arm, and was a little saddened. Darn, I was hoping for scars. Oh well, can't always win. What was that? Percy asked in shock. He had never seen any healing regeneration spell faster than his own, or Apollo's healing techniques. Naruto smiled at him. There are a few benefits to being raised in hell. Naruto stood up a bit shakily, but stretched and smiled, before realizing his sleeve was completely torn off and stained red. Damn it, I like this shirt. He turned to the store, ignoring the looks he was getting from his companions, and yanked off a dark blue shirt. He looked at the corpse and frowned. Is it supposed to do that? The group looked to see where he was pointing, and realized that the body wasn't exploding, but rather shrinking down. It became two items, a long overcoat, and a dagger. Naruto walked forward and lifted up the items, before tossing the cloak over, and looking at the dagger. A new kunai, he said with a smile, before it poofed out of existence in his hand. Naruto smiled at getting a kunai. He was unarmed when he came into this world. Getting a weapon he knew how to use was a blessing. Naruto looked to the group, who were still staring at him, frowned. What? Is the cloak not your style? Well, this GG great. Talia said in the middle of her shivers. Percy is chattering next to her, but he was definitely in better shape than her with the lion's coat. Grover looked like he was ready to jump in the fire to get warmer, and Zoe and Bianca were shaking, but much more controlled about it. Naruto was completely fine. Isobu survived at the bottom of the lake for several years in the middle of winter. His cold resistance was off the charts. Not to mention Matabi's hellfire was keeping him nice and toasty. Naruto stared at the homeless guy that offered them a space by his fire. That guy was old and grubby, but his face was familiar. He glanced at the railroad tracks, wondering if this line was even used anymore. He was thinking that maybe, wait. Naruto turned and walked away from the fire, before grabbing another empty trash barrel and breaking it, flattening it out like a sled. He ignored the questions coming at him from his group and walked to the train lines. I threw the can on top of the metal and spoke to Shukaku. Hey Shukaku. Your magnet release, can it propel objects through magnetism? Duh. Then allow me to test that. Naruto got on the metal and sat down, before entering a meditative position and closing his eyes. He channeled Shukaku's chakra and electricity sparked on the outside of his little car. Naruto actually levitated off the railing for a few seconds, before moving forward slowly, and picking up speed. Eventually, he was zipping down the line at high speeds, traveling fairly fast, but it was tiring him quickly. It required a lot of energy to channel it though him, especially since he hadn't practiced it, or even used it before. He sighed in dejection, before slowing and gliding in reverse back to the group, who were now at the edge of the platform watching him come in at high speeds. Naruto thought he could be cool and stop suddenly, and maybe dismount stylishly. Yeah, no, Naruto pulled to an abrupt stop in front of them, and was sent skidding off his little sled. He went careening down the railing, plowing through some snow and stopping ahead like roadkill. Grover and Percy shouted if he was okay, and Naruto lifted up a thumb to show he was alright. Zoe just shook her head and muttered something about an idiot, while Bianca looked concerned. Talia on the other hand was staring at the sled in wonder. She saw the electricity, so maybe she could do it too? Question for later. Before any of them could go to help the staggering sage up, the homeless guy pointed at the bay. He better hurry, train is coming in soon. Naruto heard that, and then looked down the line to see a rapidly approaching light. Gulp. Naruto immediately got to his feet and sprang forward, leaping an impressive distance as he cleared both tracks, and near 30 feet of actual distance, reaching out for Talia. She grabbed his hands, and with a heave, swung him out of the way just as the train came to a stop right in front of them. Naruto landed in a heap as Talia fell on top of him in a mini dog pile. She was embarrassed at first, but then she noticed something. He was warm, really warm. She stayed there, lying on top of his back with her hands on his neck, her body absorbing his heat. Naruto was trying to resist as her hands were cold, but Talia managed to keep him from breaking away. Their audience just stared at them, before looking at the homeless man who had vanished, and even taken his fire with him. Jerk, Grover muttered, before checking for a conductor and hoping on, the rest following him. Eventually, Naruto just picked up Talia in a piggyback ride and carried her into the car, her hands and body never separating from him. Once they got into the car, the door closed behind them. Naruto tried to let Talia down, but she held onto him. Talia, it's warm in here, you can let go. No, you're warm. So is the train. You're warmer. I bet the seats are warmer. She said nothing as she showed no intention of letting go, and Naruto sighed, before an evil grin split his face. Hey Talia? Her eyes opened. Yeah? Do you like being upside down? She frowned. Well, that depends, she shouted suddenly, as Naruto jumped straight up, before his feet hit the ceiling like he just jumped to the floor. Talia said in confusion, before looking around and noticing the whole world was completely upside down. She probably missed it since she was driving, Grover said with a shiver at the memory. You call that driving? Percy muttered. The group snickered, but a spark and a cry of dismay from Naruto shut them up. Naruto, shrugging off the small shock, looked at her with a grin on his face. Wanna stand? She looked at him skeptically, but then decided to trust him. He crouched down and let her feet touch the floor. Talia looked confused on why her feet weren't sticking, before a feeling of warmth and ecstasy shot through her system, her feet landing on the floor like they were meant to be there. Naruto stood up, not noticing her blush, and held her hand, walking her around. Her eyes were foggy from the feeling, but she was happy that she was walking around, on the ceiling. It was cool. Naruto grinned at her, and she turned and asked with a blush, why'd I feel? Naruto smiled kindly. I'm channeling my life force through your body to allow you to walk around with me. That's why I'm holding your hand. I need to be able to channel it into you. It feels weird, huh? Talia blushed heavily and turned around. Yeah, sure. Naruto walked with her for a bit, before she started jumping and she was shocked to see she fell back to the floor. She laughed like a child as she jumped higher, and that's kinda where it went wrong. She jumped too high, and the normal pull of gravity resumed. She let out a small shout and Naruto laughed. He was still holding her hand, so he simply let her dangle in outrage. Naruto just laughed as she tried to smack him, but she couldn't reach. He just kept laughing until he walked to a wall, and walked down it to let her down. She glared at him lightly, but the blush was still on her face. Naruto grinned and let go of her hand as he turned to go see the others. Taliah felt the warmth and pleasure she was feeling leave her system, and she frowned in sadness, before grinning at the memory. I got to do that again. Naruto walked back to the others, and took Grover for a walk too. He didn't think he could, which was funny at first, but he had to stop as he was actually leaving dents in the roof, and that wasn't a good thing. He offered for Percy, but the kid was too tired, and walked off towards the luxury cars to nap. Bianca walked on the walls, but she didn't for very long and didn't want to walk on the ceiling. She didn't want to break anything apparently, but she left with a ginormous blush and made Naruto look at her in confusion while she disappeared for the upper deck. Naruto asked Zoe as well, and while she was curious, she didn't feel the need. Naruto only smiled and nodded, before he jumped up and then lay on his back, staring down at the floor and relaxing. Zoe stared at him for a moment, and Naruto grinned at her. She changed her mind after that. She wouldn't hold his hand, so he had to keep a hand on her shoulder and a clone walking below in case he lost his grasp. She was up for the longest, truly transfixed by walking the world like it was upside down. Then Naruto got an idea. He made 2 more clones and had them transform into 2 ankle bracelets. After she put them on, Naruto let go. At first she screamed at him and tried to right herself, but realized she was still connected to the floor. Naruto grinned at her, told her the clones were doing it. It was the first time he saw her smile brightly. She started walking on the ceiling, the walls, up and down the poles. She even giggled when she jumped from the floor and the ceiling and back repeatedly, like a stalling backflip. Naruto couldn't help but laugh as she explored walking on every surface. And then she got an idea. Taliah and Percy were in the same black Mercedes SLK, and were talking in tones, though Taliah's was more angered than neutral. 2 figures walked towards them covered in shadow, stalking along the ceiling as they talked. Both of them were about to jump down, when Naruto pointed his finger at Percy and a trail of water appearing from seemingly nowhere dripped down, splashing on his head. Percy froze, before he reached in his pocket. Taliah seemed to notice this, and grabbed her bracelet over her arms. Zoe was smirking in amusement and Naruto just reached his hand over and dropped another drop. Right down the back of Taliah's shirt. Immediately, she slammed into the back of her seat, rubbing against it like a cat. Cold, 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 cold. And then she looked up. She saw Naruto and Zoe standing there. Naruto was fully laughing while Zoe had a victorious smirk. Taliah growled while Percy started shaking with restrained laughter. And then she looked up in shock. Hey, you're standing by yourself. How? Zoe bent over and pointed at her ankle bracelets. An idea. Naruto laughed and nodded. They're my clones. I had the idea when everybody left. She didn't want to hold my hand, so after having a clones follow us around so he could catch her if I lost my grip, I had the idea of using clones. Taliah forgot her anger and jumped at Naruto with surprising height, grabbing him by the ear. Gimme some. She fell back down, still holding Naruto's ear. Naruto lost his connection with the ceiling, and landed on top of her in a heap. Naruto let out a laugh as Taliah ended up cushioning him, and she didn't offer a complaint as his warmth was once again seeping into her. Naruto got up, and she latched onto him again. Come on. Please. Naruto laughed. Wow, she said please. She glared but didn't argue, and Naruto was even more impressed. Well, they are temporary, so I'm not sure how long they will last. They have lasted me some time. Zoe suddenly shouted in shock as the clones dispelled, and she fell for the floor head first. Naruto immediately sat up, catching the hunter and pulling her up to eye level. Hey, you okay? Sorry, I didn't think they would wear out that fast. You don't have a chakra network, so that might be why, but oomph. Zoe suddenly shouted, kicking her way out of his arms and nailing him in the balls. He crumpled to the floor and sat there for a moment, groaning and shuddering in pain. Percy was out of the inn by his side, patting his back sympathetically. Give it a second, man, it'll pass, hold on. Naruto groaned incoherently and some of his clones throughout the train fell over with him, clutching their crotches in pain. Zoe looked surprised at this. They feel your pain? Percy glared at her. Are you serious? I feel his pain. That was a whopper of a kick, you know. He caught you. Why'd you have to slam him in the balls? Percy said, exasperation clear, though his face had slightly paled as he watched what happened. Any man would have felt that if they saw it, it was full connection strong enough to lift him off the floor. Percy twitched as he relived it in his mind's eye, and then turned his eyes back to Naruto, who rolled to his side and groaned. Well, if any man G grabs me from behind, It trust you to make sure he doesn't stand up again. Naruto said shakily, before two clones came over, having picked themselves off the floor, and carried him to the back seat of a Lamborghini. Grover was sitting in the front with horrified eyes slumped against the wheel with his hands by his crotch, praying that he remembered this forever whenever another hunter rolled around. That looked fucking terrifying. Naruto groaned as he lay in the back, his head resting on the cushions. Zoe wasn't sure if she should feel guilty or not, but decided that he would recover, and she would apologize, maybe. She grunted and left, while Naruto watched her go. He muttered out, sorry, I'll see you tomorrow. She nodded to him, before walking off. Talia got in the Lambo on the other side, and put his head on her lap. She may have seemed caring, but his natural heat was what she was after, and so she had no regrets. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, comment and subscribe, as well as checking out the author on fanfiction.net.